Welcome to the Birding Life podcast. My name is Adam, and I'm your host on the podcast where we discover birds and the birders that pursue them. The Birding Life is proud to be associated with Swarovski Optic, one of the world's leading producers of binoculars, monoculars, and spotting scopes, as well as the Bird Lasser bird logging app. Spot, plot, play a part. Download and install the app to play your part in social conservation. The Birding Life is a lot more than just a podcast. It's a multi-platform resource to connect birders with each other, amazing locations, the best resources, and obviously where to find amazing birds. Head on over to our website www.thebirdinglife.com and be sure to sign up to our newsletter on the site so you do not miss out on any of the exciting things that are coming up. Be sure to follow this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it on, and please take some time to rate and comment on it. This is episode 31, and today's guest is Adam Riley, the founder of Rockjumper Birding Tours, the world's biggest birding company. He chats to us all about his recent birding adventures, tips to grow as a birder, as well as sharing all about pelagic birding. If you listen to Adam's previous interview, you will know that this is going to be a great half an hour with one of the world's leading birders. So pour yourself something to drink, sit back and enjoy. Okay, Adam, I want to welcome you to the show. I was thinking about this when I was preparing for this podcast. The reality is a lot of people have been on the show twice, but you are on the show for the third time. So welcome back to the show for the third time.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's a great honor to be on the show for the third time, and I look forward to our chat.
So last time you were on the show, you were chatting and bragging all about your Manyoni birding. Such a stunning place to go birding. I know Tyron Dahl, one of the guys who's part of our team, went birding at Manyoni a couple of weeks ago. Tell us a little bit about that quickly and about just a short edited version for those who haven't heard about it. Tell us about that, and also how's the birding been since that Manyoni experience?
Yes, so I was very fortunate to spend level 5 lockdown, the entire 5 weeks with my family at our lodge, Zebra Hills, in the Manyoni Private Game Reserve. And we had the most amazing lockdown with a 23,000 hectare back garden. And I took up the Bird Lasser Lockdown Birding Challenge and managed to find 260 bird species during the 5 weeks. And I wrote a really cool article about it, which is in the latest issue of the African BirdLife magazine. I've been back several times to Manyoni since then, a few times through the winter, where we managed to pick up some interesting birds that's come down from sort of the drier areas of Pongola into the more wetter areas of Zululand, such as Manyoni. And now that summer is here, it's wonderful to be finding the summer migrants. The cuckoos have arrived. I managed to find African barred owlet on my last trip, which was my first record for the trip, for the reserve. And also a new bird for the reserve, a little stint on one of the wetlands. But already we're getting a lot of exciting migrants, and it looks like it's going to be an amazing summer.
I think what always amazes me is the birds that you guys get to see. A couple of you guys, the Rockjumper guys, who were up at Cumberland Nature Reserve a couple of weeks ago. And I mean, we go birding there and we get a cool list in that. Your guys go there and all of a sudden they get birds that nobody else has ever seen. You know, what advice would you give for those who are listening to improve their birding? Because I mean, I'm always fascinated with the species that you guys get to see. You know, how can those who are listening grow as birders so that we can start to see more species?
So it's very much a matter of experience. You know, generally, if you go birding in a fairly limited area, you get to know the birds of that area well, and you don't necessarily know birds that might be rare in the area or once off, and in that case they might be overlooked, or you might not know the exact habitats that a certain species likes or its call, etc. So because we are birding sort of all year round and have been doing it for many years, it's actually our profession. We do know virtually every single Southern African species, and also species that aren't in Southern Africa that are potential vagrants to Southern Africa. And as a result of that, when we do see them, because we know them already, we pick them up as rarities in unusual areas. So, just to give an example, last year I was birding with some friends at Darvel Bird Sanctuary just outside Pietermaritzburg, and unusual swallow flew past me. I saw a red rump, um, and it wasn't one of the striped swallows. I didn't see any stripes on it. Immediately I thought, is that a cliff swallow or is it something else really unusual? Luckily it landed. I managed to get a few shots of it and then immediately knew it was a red rump swallow, which was the first record for KwaZulu-Natal, and in fact the first record that's ever been submitted to the Rarities Committee for South Africa. So it officially becomes the first South African record of red rump swallow. But for many people, a swallows can be quite difficult to identify and are often overlooked.
COVID-19 has been really difficult on the tourism industry. I don't think just in South Africa, I think worldwide. What has Rockjumper done to navigate the season as well as to stay afloat?
Yeah, it's been really tough. We've battened down the hatches and essentially we're in survival mode, and we'll survive this as long as it takes. But our guides are doing quite a lot of local birding, which is great. So they're kind of doing it as their own initiative and have got out into our local communities and are taking people birding all over the place and seeing amazing birds, and also really getting a lot of people into birding, a lot of new people who haven't experienced birding much. So it's been great that our local communities have had access to these world-class guides who usually are out birding the world and are now available to them. We've also got a few other really fun initiatives that we will be launching soon, which I'm sure you'll hear more about in time.
And then in terms of listeners around the world, I know that we get listeners from not just South Africa, but all around the world. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that would love to book a tour with Rockjumper in South Africa or possibly somewhere else in the world or somewhere else in Africa. With the COVID restrictions in place, how does that look at the moment? What would the procedure be? Would they get hold of you guys and you put them on hold until the right time? How does that look at the moment for somebody who wants to do a tour with Rockjumper?
So, every country has different restrictions and regulations, both from the destination where people are coming from and where they're going to. So it really depends, and every situation is unique. So if people do want to find out if they are interested in our tours, and we do have a few tours starting to run. We've got our first Tanzania and Kenya tour is actually on the go at the moment, and we've got another one starting up in a few days' time. We've got several tours in December, including Costa Rica, Colombia, and a few other destinations. So if you are interested in doing any tours, feel free to contact us on info@rockjumperbirding.com, and our team will advise you on what the requirements and restrictions are.
And then we know that COVID-19 has changed a heck of a lot of things. In which ways do you think that the AV tourism industry, the companies, how do you think business will change going forward?
It's very hard to predict because we're not out of it yet. There certainly is a pent-up demand. People are desperate to travel. Whether they will travel in different ways, we don't know. Possibly there'll be more virtual birding travel. We do think that there will be less long haul airplanes out there, and probably the cost of actually booking flights and tickets will be higher, which might restrict people to traveling as much as they were traveling. But we really don't know what it'll be like because we're not out of it yet.
And then Rockjumper has started offering pelagic birding trips off of Durban. Now, Cape Town is seen by many people as the pelagic birding hotspot in South Africa. So, why would you say somebody should go and do pelagic birding off of Durban?
Yeah, without a doubt, Cape Town is the best pelagic birding center in South Africa. Most of the pelagics that we get off South Africa come from the subantarctic islands to our south, and Cape Town is way further south than Durban. and therefore gets greater volumes and species diversity of pelagic species. However, Durban does have some really interesting birds. And over the last few years, with more pelagics going out and also going out much deeper than they used to go out many years ago, some fascinating species have been found. Probably most notable is Burrell's petrel, which is a little known and not too recently described species that breeds mostly around Reunion in the Indian Ocean. And only a few years ago was it actually discovered to be even coming into Southern African waters. Nowadays, between sort of mid-September and mid to late November, we found that they're actually very regular off Durban, but about 30 to 40 kilometers out, which is beyond the range of the pelagics that used to go out many years ago that didn't find these birds. And now it's probably the most accessible place in the world to actually find Burrell's petrel.
Adam, you've done a lot of international birding, which we'll speak about in the moment. But let me ask you a tough question. What potential species do you think we could see coming into South African waters in the near future? I mean, based on the fact that you understand a lot about international birding and that, what possible species do you predict we could possibly get to see in Southern African waters?
Well, seabirds are notorious vagrants. So pretty much anything can pitch up almost anywhere. For instance, there was a Tahiti petrel recorded off Durban, first record for Southern Africa last year. And that's not even one that we really expected. It's way out of range. Also, actually, on one of the Rockjumper Pelagics a few years ago, we got the only record of Amsterdam Island albatross off Cape Town. And what's interesting with Amsterdam Island albatross, it's a form of wandering albatross that even in adult plumage retains a dark back. And they breed on a French-owned island called Amsterdam Island. And there were very few of them until quite recently, but conservation efforts have now really grown the population. And species like that, or Amsterdam Island albatross in particular, can be expected to be found more regularly now in Southern Africa. In fact, they've been satellite tracked into waters off Mozambique and KwaZulu-Natal. And it's just a matter of time before we start seeing them more regularly. But there's a whole plethora of species, especially there's been a lot of splitting going on in pelagic groups, such as the Bandrum storm petrel groups, some of the albatrosses, some of the dark-backed small shearwaters. And without a doubt, there'll be new species that we'll start picking up in Southern Africa as more and more people go out and there's more people are taking photographs and picking up some of these rare birds and studying them really hard. Prions are another group. There's a whole bunch of new species, and some of them haven't been recorded in Southern Africa, and I'm sure that they do occur every now and then.
But what amazes me is, when these rare birds show up, I mean, to be honest with you, I find pelagic birding incredibly difficult. It's not birds that we're familiar with, birds that we get to see now and then, unless you do pelagic trips very often. How do the guys identify these things? How do you see a bird that's flying around in the middle of 1,000 birds or whatever, hundreds of birds flying around, and you're like, oh my word, that's that bird? How do you get to identify those kinds of species? It's insane.
Yeah, with anything, if you spend enough time doing it, you become an expert, and you do your research and read the latest findings about different splits and new discoveries on how to separate species. And there's still species in the field that can't be separated from the information that we currently have. So getting a lot of photos is really important. But once you're an experienced seabirder, you can look out at a group of birds or even see a distant bird. And just based on its jizz, the way it flies, its shape, the way it holds its head, the way it might circle upwards or flap its wings, you can often tell that it's a species that you're familiar with or a species that you're not familiar with, and be able to get down to a specific species identification long before you can actually see fine plumage details.
Hi, my name is Chris. And I'm the host of the Birding Life Youth Podcast, the show where we dive into the minds of the young birders in our world to find out what makes them tick. Our first podcast is now online. The guest for this podcast is Daniel Engelbrecht. We speak about many topics related to birds, including a story of an embarrassing misidentification. This will be a bi-weekly podcast, with the next podcast coming out on the 31st of October. From exciting twitches to embarrassing dips, we will be covering stories of what energizes the young birders in our world. Be sure to stay in the loop by following us on your preferred podcast streamer, and like, follow, and subscribe to all of the Birding Life social media platforms.
I know for some people, thinking about going out to sea is not the most attractive option. I mean, you think of the boat going up and down, and you think of getting seasick and all these kinds of things. You know, what do you think is the attraction of pelagic birding? What makes it so amazing?
Well, I must admit, I'm not a great sailor, so I don't particularly enjoy spending hours out at sea bobbing around. Although I do love looking at seabirds, so I force myself out every now and then just to keep myself trained on seabirds and hope to pick up some new species and just enjoy the amazing birds that I do see, even if we only see common ones. But yeah, it is a very challenging environment, and to be an expert at it, you need to spend a lot of time out there. But going out once a year is fine as well, and over the years, you'll get to see some really special birds.
I know last year, I think it was last year, yeah, we did an outing with BirdLife Port Natal. We went out and we got the grey petrel, which is really amazing. But something that I realized with going out, because I was a little bit nervous before I went out. I was really worried I was going to be barfing over the side. So I was nervous about that. And I mean, I hadn't been out to sea in a small boat, and there was a bit of the fear factor side of things. But once I got out and you had Indian yellow-nosed albatrosses flying around the boat and all these birds, which were, I'd maybe seen some of them far, far out at sea from land, and literally just having these birds a couple of meters from you is an awe-inspiring experience. I don't think you can, as a birder, I don't think there's much that possibly rivals actually getting out and getting close to these birds that are almost mysterious because you don't get to see them very often.
Yeah, it is very special being out there, and those birds are spectacular. Just their incredible adaptation for living in these extreme environments is as you say, awe-inspiring. I mean, especially on a rough day, and you're out there and you look at these tiny little storm petrels and bouncing in the waves, and they look like they're having the time of their lives. And you think, how can this tiny, delicate little bird live in these rough waters? And yet, that's where they thrive, and they seek out the rough waters. So yeah, I mean there are several things you can do to mitigate seasickness, and you would certainly enjoy the trip a lot more if you're not nauseous. Um, Getting a good night's sleep the night before, avoiding alcohol, avoiding coffee and chocolate in the morning are all good pieces of advice. Over the years, I've used all sorts of different remedies to try alleviates seasickness. I've eventually found a medicine that works for me, and since I've been taking it, I've never been sick again. But it took me years of experimentation. You get quite a few different meds that you can get over the counter or on prescription. You get the patches you stick behind your ear. You get various bands that push pressure points, or I even had a kind of watch that gave electrical shocks into my wrist. None of those really work for me, but they work for other people. So if you are prone to seasickness, don't despair. Just keep trying different remedies, and eventually you'll find the one that works for you.
That thing with getting shocked in the arm is almost like you get shocked and you forget about the fact that your stomach's not feeling good. I don't know. It sounds quite scary. So, Adam, you've done a lot of traveling internationally, and I'm sure you've done a lot of pelagic birding, not just in Southern Africa, but around the world. Which are some spots where you've been able to experience pelagic birding outside of Southern African waters, and what have been some of the highlights?
Yeah, I've been fortunate to have done some really exciting pelagic trips. Probably the most enjoyable one that I've done, where we've got some extremely rare and little known species, including an as yet undescribed storm petrel, was a 31-day pelagic that I did, starting in New Zealand and ending in Japan, that went through a bunch of sort of small islands off New Zealand, islands off Australia, Norfolk Island in particular, then up through New Caledonia, Solomon Islands, New Guinea, Micronesia, and finally ending off in Japan. And we saw some of the world's rarest and most sought after seabirds. The one undescribed species that we saw has been given a provisional name of New Caledonian storm petrel. I think the year we went was the second time it had ever been seen, and it was quite a large storm petrel with streaks on the belly, very similar to the New Zealand storm petrel, but quite a bit bigger, that we saw, and I actually got photographs of just off the coast of New Caledonia. On that trip, I also photographed Newell shearwater, which is one of these fairly newly described species of shearwaters, and it was the first site record for Australia. There'd been one dead specimen that had washed up on the beaches before. But some really exciting seabirding on that trip. I've also done several trips down into the subantarctic and Antarctic areas. And although the species diversity is not necessarily as high as some of the sort of more temperate areas, the sea watching is fantastic. Off some of the islands, you get huge numbers of albatrosses and shearwaters and petrels, as well as, especially going to South Georgia Island, for instance, you get off and you're in amongst a colony of several 100,000 pairs of king penguins walking around amongst these amazing birds. It's really one of the absolute experiences of a lifetime. The subantarctic islands of New Zealand are also fantastic. I did a trip there a couple of years ago. We visited Snares, Campbell, and Auckland Islands, and there's probably the richest seabird waters in the world with regard to species diversity. I think we had something like 12 or 14 species of albatrosses on that trip. Many of them we even saw at nesting colonies, and it's just wonderful walking around, sort of displaying southern royal albatrosses just a few meters away from you. You actually got to walk off the trail sometimes to get around their nest that they've built right on the trails. Really spectacular experiences.
It's just making me start drooling thinking about the flock to Marion. I know it's meant to be 2021 up in 2022 now. I think it's going to be an amazing experience.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that trip.
What can people actually expect to see? I mean, I know you guys are supporters of BirdLife South Africa, and I know people listening to this might not have booked for it yet. What can people expect to see? Why should they book to go on the flock to Marion?
So Flock to Marion is a BirdLife South Africa trip on one of the large cruise liners. I think we can take about 2,000 people on the ship, which sounds horrific for a pelagic birding trip, but it actually has worked out really, really well on the previous two flocks that BirdLife South Africa have run. And there's multiple viewing decks, and one of the great advantages of this flock is that BirdLife arranges a large number of pelagic bird experts. I think last time we had 18 Rockjumper tour guides on the boat, as well as guides from other companies and other seabird experts like Peter Harrison, who's one of the world seabird experts. So you got this incredible wealth of knowledge on the ship that are all showing people the birds. And because there's so many great birders and so many eyes out there, we really pick up some incredible species. And the viewing actually isn't that bad, even though you're on a large ship. The birds often come pretty close, and this worked out really well. Obviously, it's also incredibly economic because of the number of people that are on the ship. So it's great value for money. It's with MSC and can be booked through BirdLife South Africa, I believe. Otherwise, Rockjumper also bought quite a few cabins which are available through us, so you can book directly with us. The idea with Flock to Marion, which is going to run in January 2022, is leaving Durban, heading out to Marion and Prince Edward Islands, and then ending in Cape Town. I think it's 7 nights on the boat. And, there'll be some really good birding within the 200 nautical miles that still counts as part of the Southern African subregion. And then going further south, we might pick up some of the more specialist subantarctic species that very rarely or never come into Southern African waters. And then around Marion Island itself, we're hoping that we'll be able to get to see a few of the endemic species like lesser sheathbill and Kerguelen tern and one or two species of cormorants within that area.
Oh, I really can't wait. But on a little bit closer to home, like we spoke about the fact that you guys have started offering pelagic trips off of Durban. Let me first just ask the question: is there room for another pelagic birding tour operator off of the Durban coast, or is the market a bit stretched? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's really something that we're doing just now during COVID. I don't know whether we will continue doing it. And the reason we did it really is for our guides to get out and do a little bit of birding. They're keen to get out there and take some people out. It's not really something that we're doing for the money because there's very little in it. The margins are very, very tight once you charter the boat and pay for the fuel, etc. But yeah, it seems like it's been pretty popular so far. Our first two trips have been fully booked out. We still have a few spaces for our next two trips in late November and early December. And then we'll take a gap for a few months, usually December, sort of mid-December through to mid-March isn't really a great time of year. We'll start again in the latter period of March and see how it goes.
And in terms of birding off of Durban, pelagic birding off of Durban, what species can one expect to see, and what are the best seasons to book a trip?
So seasonally, as I mentioned, sort of starting in March, which is a migration period for seabirds. So you're getting some of the summer species that breed in the northern hemisphere still around, and you get species like black-bellied storm petrel coming past our shores. They're around just during the transition period, March, April, and then again sort of August, September into early October. So from March all the way through winter, when there's more of the southern species coming up, through to about mid-December is quite good. Different birds at different seasons. So, there's certain species that are there all year round, like Indian yellow-nosed albatross and Shire albatross and white-chinned petrels and sooty shearwaters. And then in summer, you get more chance of great shearwaters and sooty terns, Arctic skua, or jaeger as it's called. Parasitic jaeger is the new name for it. And then in winter, you get better chances for some of the other albatrosses like wandering and black-browed and pintado or Cape petrel. And then in the transitional periods, it's better for things like soft plumage petrel, Burrow's petrel, as we spoke about earlier, great wing petrels. The Wilson storm petrels are around all year, but European storm petrels are more in summer, obviously. Black-bellied is a transitional species. And then there's vagrant storm petrels like white-faced and white-bellied that you have to be extremely lucky to find.
And then what does a day of pelagic birding look like on a practical level? Run through the logistics of the day. So from when people arrive, what time do they arrive, and how does the day look?
So we plan to set sail at 6 o'clock in the morning. So it's really early. And similar to land birds, pelagic birds are also most active from 6 to about 11 o'clock. And then there's a lull in activity during the middle of the day. So we get on at 6. We've using a fast boat that hasn't done Durban pelagics before, and we zoom out straight to the 30-40K mark, which is the deep water mark, where there's upwellings that bring rich waters from deep under. We get out there in an hour and a half to 2 hours at the most, and we then throw out buckets of frozen chum. This is a pretty gory mixture of shark livers, if we can get those from the shark's board, mixed with sardine oil and bits of reject fish that are all frozen together. And we throw this out into the water, and we basically just follow the buckets of chum as they slowly break up and disperse in the water. And the smell of this chum actually brings in some really interesting seabirds. So some of the species that are quite shy of actually being around ships will come in and inspect the chum or see what's going on. And you end up getting these birds that are often usually only scattered in very low density over the ocean, coming in and spending time around the boat. So we bob out there for a while. If there's any trawlers around, we'll also go and spend time around the trawlers, because that attracts a different subset of species that are attracted as the nets are brought in by the trawlers. And then about 11 o'clock, we then pack up and head back to harbour, getting in sort of somewhere between 12 and 1 or just thereafter.
And then those, we spoke earlier about, preparing to see those unusual species, but, what books and resources would you recommend for people that are looking to book a pelagic trip so they can kind of prepare themselves ahead of time?
So if you want to study up on your seabirds, the traditional field guides like the Roberts and the Sassel will cover all the species that are known for Southern Africa. And that, of course, will pretty much cover you unless you see something really rare. But it's really good also to study some of the more international guides that cover all the species in the world. The original one was Peter Harrison's Seabirds, but that's now become a bit outdated, although I believe he is working on a new one. There's Albatrosses, Petrels, and Shearwaters of the World by Derek Onley, which is really good with illustrations. And last year, Steve Howell published Oceanic Seabirds of the World, which is a photographic field guide with all the latest taxonomy and new species that have been split and discovered, etc. So I can highly recommend that one. There's also a lot of online resources. So if you start digging into seabird identification websites and discussions, there's a huge amount of material out there because there are a lot of people that really, really love seabird.
And then one of the awesome things about going out on pelagic is being able to get photos of these birds up really close. But it's not easy to do photos out at sea. The boat's moving around and there's spray and all this kind of thing. So what tips would you give for those who want to do some photography on a pelagic trip?
Yeah, seabird photography is particularly challenging. So tips for seabird photography, the number one tip I would say is just take a lot of pictures. So probably 90% or more of your pictures, you're going to miss the bird or cut off a wing, or the bird will be behind a wave, etc. So I just take a lot of photographs. So I find a place where I'm not in anyone's way and either sit or get a really steady foothold, and I just bang away and take as many photos as I can. Also try to predict where the bird's moving and potentially focus ahead of the bird and wait for it to fly into the screen or into the shot. You also got to look quite carefully at exposure. You got to decide whether you mostly photographing against the water or you mostly photographing against the sky, and set your exposure for the shots that you predict will come your way. Also, I generally take off any zooms or converters on my cameras to get a slightly wider angle, because it can be quite hard to find these seabirds, and if you've got a wider angle, you've got a better chance. And also another tip is if you can set your lens to focus at a greater distance, that's a great idea, because then it doesn't try to focus at a shorter distance. So I think on my lens I can set it at I think it's 8 meters and further out, and it's not trying to focus on the shorter distance, so it focuses much faster on further distances out.
So I'm sure a lot of people listening to this now and they're like, oh my word, they just want to book a pelagic trip. So how can people go about booking a pelagic trip with you guys?
Yeah, so just drop us an email at info@rockjumper.com, and Crystal, who answers those emails, will be more than delighted to book you onto one of our upcoming pelagic trips off Durban.
Thanks, Adam. I really appreciate your time. It's always good having you on the show, and I'm looking forward to getting to chat to you again. It's always awesome. Thanks some more for your time, eh?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Adam. It's been great chatting.
We are proud to be working in association with Wild Books to help get all the best birding resources into your hands at a great price. If you would like to support the Birding Life Project and the resources that we are putting out, please click on the link in either the comment section of this podcast or in our social media posts. Your support helps us to improve and hopefully make a bigger impact. Be sure to head over to our website, www.thebirdinglife.com, and check out all the exciting resources that we have on our website, including our exciting forum section to connect you with the world of birding, birders, and exciting birds out there. Do not forget to follow The Birding Life on Instagram and Facebook. We really appreciate everyone that takes the time to interact with these accounts. Be sure to check out Birdlasser and download the app on either iOS or Android, and keep a life list while playing your part in social conservation, as well as Swarovski Optic, one of the world's leading producers of binoculars, and spotting scopes. So until next time, be blessed and happy birding.